Good morning. I came to the woods today to start this new video series revisiting Walden, or Life in the Woods. For those of you that don't know, this book written by Henry David Thoreau, he was written about almost 200 years ago, and it is for me one of my favorite books, and a book that I call the Bible of simple living. And most people that are connected to the simple living movement for sure would have heard about it or read it. So I would invite you to join me to read the book or reread the book. I'll leave a link in the description below. You can read it online for free. You can get it in EPUB, e-readers versions for free also, because it's a very old book and I think it's in public domain right now. So Thoreau goes to live in the woods near a lake called Walden, thus the name of the book, and he builds his own wood cabin to live on and try to sustain himself by doing work for others for about 2 years and 2 months, if I'm not mistaken. And during that time he thinks a lot about life, about what is necessary to live, and it's a very thought-provoking book. Even though it's 200 years old, there are many things which are still valid today, and when we consider what life is all about. So it's definitely a good read that I would recommend to everybody. And this series is about going through the book and highlighting my favorite parts and the ones that I think are more food for the brain in a way. And I hope that would be a good opportunity also to get some feedback from others who have read it and different thoughts or realizations that you kind of get when you read the book instead of just a monologue. So I invite you to comment and to read with me as we'll go along in this video series. I'm not going to read the book in the video, that would be too long and too boring. I'm just going to highlight a few parts that I think are interesting. And so for those of you that did not read, please do not take this video as a replacement to read the book. It's not at all that, okay? I'm not going to cover even 2% of the book. Just going to go through my favorite parts. So today, this first part is about the first chapter, which is titled Economy. Now, this is already interesting because when we think about economy, we think about employment, tax rates, and the price of the oil and all that stuff. Economy is way more simple. Actually, the word economy, that comes from the Greek oikonomia or something like that, means household management. So how are we managing our household, our sustainability, our livelihood? And this is what Thoreau talks about in his first part of the book. He questions a lot our work, money, our livelihood, our food. So the beginning of the book, he questions what are the really important things for human beings to live, to allow us to live. And he concludes that it's mostly food, clothing, and shelter or housing. And so from then on he starts this discussion or these thoughts on economy. Now let me start here by the first, just a few pages into the book, the first paragraph that I think is really interesting. He says this: actually, the laboring man has not leisure for a true integrity day by day. He cannot afford to sustain the manliest relations to men. His labor will be depreciated in the market. He has no time to be anything but a machine. How can he remember well his ignorance, which his growth requires, who has so often to use his knowledge? Now, for those of you like me who are not native English speakers, this style of writing can be hard sometimes because you need to read it 2 or 3 times to actually get what he's saying, because the vocabulary used and the style of writing are a bit different from what is used nowadays. But this is extremely interesting. What Thoreau is saying here is that a laboring man has not leisure for a true integrity day by day. We live as machines, and this is very typical in the capitalist system. We have no time to be human beings. We have to struggle a lot to generate money, to sustain our lives, and this is almost a cliche right now, but there are a lot of quotes and even comics that illustrate that the rat race, right? That we try to have a lifestyle, but then to support that lifestyle we need to work, and then that work eventually takes toll in our health, in our time available, in our leisure, and then we really don't have time to enjoy that life. Or we need a car to go to the job, and then the job pays the car, and then it's just like this cycle. And then this phrase here is so important. How can you remember well is ignorance, which is growth requires. This is deep, right? If you think about it, our growth requires that we know what we do not know. Our ignorance, we need to be aware of it. And yet, if we are so busy that we cannot even think about it, how we will get out of that ignorance and how will we grow, right? So this whole system that is perpetuating this lack of time for actually living is a hindrance to our growth, to our development. This is very, very interesting. So let's go a little bit further down. And again, he says, what are the necessities of man? What are the true necessaries and means of life? And he says, it appears as if men had deliberately chosen the common mode of living because they prefer it to any other. Yet, they honestly think there is no choice left. But alert and healthy natures remember that the sun rose clear. It is never too late to give up our prejudices. No way of thinking or doing, however ancient, can be trusted without proof. I've discussed this a few times with my wife also. We have a lifestyle that is different from what you could consider the normal lifestyle. And when we sometimes look at some of our friends or colleagues or family or acquaintances, there are people that we know that perhaps they would enjoy to have a different kind of lifestyle, and yet they think they have no choice. This is what he talks about. In a way, you are stuck in the system, and you think that because you're stuck, you cannot get out. There's no way, because you need the money and you need to work for the money, and so you're stuck in that rat race. And what Thoreau is saying here, that there is a choice. If you really want to, there is a choice. You don't need to be feeling stuck. Sometimes we need to look at how other people are doing it, and it's never a matter of doing like he did, these drastic changes of going to live alone in the woods and build your own house. But sometimes small changes can have lasting impact if they are done consistently over time. So I think it is the small steps that matter. Slowly, your life can change, and you can hear a lot of these stories how people get rid of credit card debt, and thousands and thousands of debt, by thinking about how they're managing their lifestyle, economy again, right? So, and by doing small changes, they can eventually get rid of that debt and make different choices on life. So this is very interesting. It's important to realize that we have a choice. Okay, we're not stuck. Just a little bit down, and this part I think is very funny. One farmer says to me, "You cannot live on vegetable food solely, for it furnishes nothing to make bones with." And so he religiously devotes a part of his day to supplying his system with the raw material of bones. Walking all the while, he talks behind his oxen, which, with vegetable-made bones, jerk him and his lumbering plow along in spite of every obstacle. I guess if Thoreau was alive today and making YouTube videos, he would be one of those vegan promoters. I don't know if he was actually vegetarian or if he was just living on vegetarian food during his stay in Walden. I'm not sure about that. But this is very interesting. Of course, this has been debunked already a bunch of times. Vegetarian food is obviously enough to sustain our bodies and to give a lot of strength. That's why you have bodybuilders and Olympic athletes, not only vegetarian but even vegan. So, but what is funny here is again the farmer is saying that he cannot live on this kind of food because it gives no nourishment, no strength, right? So, and later he explains that the farmer is spending a lot of his time and energy to grow food, to feed the animals, to grow the animals, to then eat them. And all that energy and time he's spending, he could be just living a life in a more simple way, not needing all that energy, and maybe having a simpler diet. But then the really funny part is that when he says, all the while the farmer is talking and criticizing his choices, basically, the farmer is sitting in the cart, which the ox is pulling, and the ox, which is actually the strongest animal there, pulling not only the cart but the plow and doing all the work, is eating all the grass, right? So this is like a small irony that he highlights. So let's go a bit further. And again, this interesting paragraph. Most of the luxuries and many of the so-called comforts of life are not only indispensable, but positive hindrances to the elevation of mankind. Right? So this is interesting. In a way, and many spiritual paths also highlight this, that too much materialism, too much luxury, right? Too much attention to the physical sphere of life can actually be a hindrance to your spiritual development, because your mind is attracted and is guided to matter. So if you are attracted and you are thinking or you are concerned or worried about all the material things, then you have less energy or time to devote to other things. And then he continues, with respect to luxuries and comforts, the wisest have ever lived a more simple and meager life than the poor. Right? So it's important, I wouldn't say to live an austere, hard life. I think it's important to have the basic necessities to live a decent and comfortable life, but not go past that. Even if you have the means, even if you have the money, I think if you allow your mind to indulge in a lot of physical luxuries, it eventually degrades the mind. And that's why all the wisest, like he says, have ever lived a simple and meager life, even than the poor, right? So it's a good way to put it. One more, this is a bit longer. I can tell you this small story. It says, not long since a strolling Indian went to sell baskets at the house of a well-known lawyer in my neighborhood. Do you wish to buy any baskets? He asked. No, we don't want any, was the reply. What? Exclaimed the Indian as he went out the gate. Do you mean to starve us? Having seen his industrious white neighbor so well off that the lawyer had only to weave arguments, and by some magic wealth and standing followed, he had said to himself, I will go into business. I will weave baskets. It is a thing which I can do. Thinking that when he had made the baskets, he would have done his part, and then it would be the white man's to buy them. He had not discovered that it was necessary for him to make it worth the others while to buy them, or at least make him think that it was so, or to make something else which it would be worth his while to buy. I too had woven a kind of basket of a delicate texture, but I had not made it worth anyone's while to buy them. Yet, not the less, in my case, did I think it worth my while to weave them, and instead of studying how to make it worth man's while to buy my baskets, I studied rather how to avoid the necessity of selling them. The life which men praise and regard as successful is but one kind. Why should we exaggerate any one kind at the expense of others? So it's a bit long, and it's not easy again to read the style that Thoreau writes. But I think the gist of this part is this part here that he says, where Thoreau talks about himself, that he also has his own baskets to weave, but he did not try to sell them. Instead, he tried to simplify his life to not need to sell baskets. Okay, so this is, again, I think it's a principle, it's an aspect of this capitalist system that we have. We are trying to, and I think today that's really, really obvious. We are trying to create products or services that are not really needed, and then we try to sell them to make others convinced that they need them, right? And so we create this cycle of creating things and creating needs. And Thoreau asks, why not simply to not need to do that, and live a simpler life instead of making something and then try to sell it and to cover the cost of making that something. So again, food for thought for sure. So this finishes more or less the first part of economy. Let me know if you have any thoughts or comments, and I will be back soon for a second part. Maybe before that I'll make some other videos on more related to our land and some plans we have and what will be our next steps. About natural farming of Masanobu Fukuoka, I also want to speak about that, and sometime soon I'll talk about Walden again. Okay, so bye bye, have a nice day, take care.